Okay. So, Hare Krishna, dear ladies. Welcome to the July Urban Devi Sangha and Women's Discussion Group. A special welcome to those joining us for the first time. If you are joining us for the first time, please write it in the chat so that we can all say hello. My name is Damodar Priya Devi Dasi, and I co-host this monthly gathering with our dear Rukmini Devi Dasi, or Rukmini Walker, as well as my god sisters Surabhi Govinda Devi Dasi and Narataki Radha Devi Dasi. So let me introduce our guest speaker for today. Today we have Citi-Śakti Devi Dasi, who is a caring and dynamic leader and a powerhouse of spiritual inspiration who is very dear to countless devotees worldwide. She is a disciple of Bhakti Tirtha Swami and has been practicing and sharing Krishna consciousness for 30 years, serving internationally as a speaker, a mentor, and a sangha leader. She is an executive member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists, Spirituality, and Psychiatry SIG, and the co-founder of MindSpace. It's a mental health service for devotees in the UK. She graduated from Imperial College as a medical doctor in the 1990s, and she specialized as a psychiatrist. She combines over 25 years of experience in scientific advances in mental health with Krishna consciousness. She's regularly broadcasted on BBC, radio, as well as World Service, and she's known for her spiritual commentary on current affairs, as well as mental health and well-being. She's a thought leader in mental health and spirituality, and she's spoken at several large international organizations around the world, as well as contributed to chapters in several books and published in peer-reviewed journals. And today we are so blessed to have her speaking to us on boundaries before a breakdown in bhakti. And just a brief description for those who haven't heard of before. So she speaks on how when we're so enthusiastic to be as much service as possible, she asks us, do you find that you're losing your balance? Do you struggle to find time for your spiritual practice and self-care amidst how much you have to do? And when you say no, do you feel selfish? And then despite doing so much, do you feel unseen and undervalued? So with all those questions in mind, in this session, Citi-Śakti will help us explore what boundaries are, why they're necessary for spiritual growth, and how they can facilitate a better life and service. So thank you so much, Citi-Śakti, for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Damodar Priya. Thank you for the warm welcome. So wonderful to see all of you ladies. So lovely to be welcomed so warmly back to Urban Devi. Yeah, I feel privileged, and it's really my pleasure to be here talking about this really important topic of boundaries before a breakdown in bhakti, and the importance of boundaries before a breakdown in anything, really. Because usually where I see a breakdown in any area of someone's life, there's usually been some sort of compromise of boundaries or a lack of establishing boundaries. So I really am hopeful and prayerful that you're all able to walk away from this session with something that can enrich your human life and deepen your spiritual life. Before we begin, I'm going to say a prayer called the Mangalacharan. It invites auspiciousness. It allows the consciousness to tune in to the radio frequency of spiritual and divine messages and communication. That is more grounded than it sounds. It sounds a little new age and heebie-jeebie, but it's not. It's reality. We have, we have an ability to decide what we tune into, and sound vibration plays a big role in that. I find prayer is like a spiritual magic spell. The words we speak, they create a reality. So I'm going to chant this Mangalacharan, and if you know it, please join me. Then we'll get into the topic. Om Gyantimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yata Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajata Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sarvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Tarubhischa Kripa Sindhu Bevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. One thing I really admire about the Urban Devi Sangha is that the topics that are discussed and the ways in which the deep process of bhakti, approaching divinity through love, affection, devotion, in a collaborative way. The approach we take in the Urban Devi group is one where we have practical spirituality and depth of devotion side by side. I really appreciate how the Urban Devi community really embodies and lives this principle that Srila Prabhupada time and time again repeats in many of his lectures and purports, where he says that every devotee has to manage two selves, their human self and their spiritual self. And that really is fundamental and the foundation of avoiding things like spiritual bypassing, where we can engage in deep spiritual practices that actually serve to also enrich our human life. Deep devotion is not independent nor dependent on a life of suffering. There's a relationship there, but when we go to one extreme or the other, that one should never suffer to experience a deep spiritual life, or that you can't have a deep spiritual life unless you suffer terribly, then we usually get lost somewhere. So I really appreciate how Urban Devi always chooses to keep this let's try to have sessions which serve the humanity and the divinity of every person, every Devi, urban or otherwise. So let's look at this. Boundaries before a breakdown in bhakti. How can we understand boundaries better? I feel like it's important with every topic to start from the beginning. You start at the bottom floor of a high-rise building, you're more likely to have a building that stands tall and strong for a long time. So let's get down into the roots of what a boundary is. When we think of the word boundary or say the word boundary, for most people, logically, not emotionally, just logically, what do we think of? We tend to think of a boundary as a limit, some sort of perimeter. Okay, it serves a function. Okay, boundaries can be quite functional, thought of as quite a functional thing. They serve a purpose, and it's usually to set a limit or a parameter, and especially healthy boundaries, good boundaries, they serve to protect both what's within the boundary and what's outside of the boundary. Okay, boundaries help to create more trust. And because they protect, they inevitably create safety. And where there's more trust and safety, then naturally respect follows. Every spiritual tradition since time immemorial, at the heart of it has respect for each other, for ourselves, and for God, for Krishna, for divinity. And when we have these things, when boundaries are there, when you have healthy boundaries, it leads to less disappointment, actually. Often, if we really reflect, we've let ourselves not have boundaries in certain areas of our life, thinking or deluding ourselves that, oh, if I don't have a boundary, less people are going to be disappointed. But actually, where we'll find that actually we tend to disappoint people more where we don't have boundaries, because there's no clarity. And so people are just left with assumption. And this word assume, if you spell it out, what does it spell out? Makes an ass out of you and me. Okay, so assumptions are really quite dangerous territory. So boundaries really help with that. Every boundary has to have criteria. Okay, healthy boundaries have criteria. Healthy boundaries have parameters against which they're measured by. They serve to define the boundary. So if a boundary is a limit or perimeter, there has to be something that defines it. And boundaries are there across every sense of ourself and every sense of existence. Our physicality, okay, our physical self, psychological self, social self, and even the spiritual self. How they're created, what they look like, what they include, what they exclude, just varies across these different parameters. We also have to have boundaries and, limits and perimeters in every area of our life: home life, social life, work life, leisure time, our spiritual practices, our physical health, so many different areas of our life. So boundaries really are everywhere. We can't ignore the topic of boundaries. In fact, people who are good at establishing, maintaining, and adjusting boundaries and do them thoughtfully actually progress in various areas of their life far more than they would without boundaries. And the number one reason people don't have boundaries is because they misunderstand boundaries and this word limit as restrictive. But it's not. It's not restrictive. Restriction means all that there exists is the things inside the boundary and there's nothing else outside of it. But actually, if you look at a healthy boundary, it takes account of what's inside as well as what's outside. Let's take a simple wall. Just a simple wall. The walls of your home, right? The walls of your home create a safe space that protects you from the outside world. Okay, it's made in such a way, those walls are made in such a way that they keep you warm in the winter, keep you cool in the summer. And they're designed in such a way that they take account of the elements outside: wind, rain, sun, noise. And because the boundary considers what's outside of the boundary, it's not limiting, but that boundary allows flow, because then you can have windows and you can have doors, right? So actually, when we understand this word boundary, not as a limit in a restrictive way, but limit as in it creates possibilities. And then we can create lane markings on a highway, okay? A highway that actually takes us where we want to go. Why do people like highways more than driving in places where there's no, if you ever tried to drive somewhere where there's no lane markings and you don't know where the road is, you'd call those places underdeveloped, wouldn't you? Right? Oh, they're so underdeveloped, there's no roads. Someone might go, it's rustic and it's relaxing. It is if there's only one or two cars on the road. But the minute there's more than a few, that same rustic, relaxing atmosphere starts to become chaotic. So this session really serves, really hope to help us all to have a healthier understanding of boundaries and get some tools and skills in which we can empower and enable ourselves to have healthier boundaries. So healthy understanding of boundaries considers what's inside the boundary as well as what's outside. So the limit is not one that's restrictive, but one that creates possibilities. a few more things. I think these are like debunking myths about boundaries. Boundaries can be changed. With review, you can change the boundary. I'm going to stick to the wall analogy because sometimes what you see in front of you is easiest to work with. Who here has done renovations? You need a bigger bedroom. You can change the way the wall is. You want more space downstairs? You can make an extension, knock down an old wall and create a new one. Right? So based on our changing needs, boundaries can be reviewed and changed. Sometimes we fear setting boundaries because we worry that we're going to be stuck with that forever. But every boundary can be reviewed and changed. Boundaries are movable. They can be moved in an instant, in a moment. Okay, many of them. The more subtle the boundary, okay, so a physical wall might not take a moment to move. You can break it in a moment, but moving it in a moment is a little difficult. But the more subtle the boundary, it can be moved. And it can be moved relative to what's on the other side. Relative to what's on. It's like the windows and doors. They create an instant movability, an instant fluctuation in the boundary of the wall. Some boundaries can even be permeable, just permeable by design, right? I've given the example of doors and windows, but some are just by design permeable. Look at your skin, right? Look at any porous surface. It lets in particles which are smaller than the holes that are there and keeps out things that are bigger. Who here sieves flour when they bake, right? You sift your flour, keep out the big lumps and let the nice fine flour come in to make a lighter bake. Okay, so there's a boundary there. You're making use of it. We have boundaries everywhere. Everywhere we look, we are created with boundaries. Krishna put so many boundaries within our body. Some are very visible. Some we can't see. Even our own mind has boundaries for our own protection. We have an unconscious, a subconscious, and a conscious mind. 90% of your mind lies in the subconscious and unconscious. You have access to about 10%. It's for our own protection. With all the things we remember, which is not very much, we can be quite troubled, or we can be overwhelmed with inspiration. Imagine if another 9 times more was revealed to us. We'd probably not be able to manage. But these boundaries that are there in the mind, can you see them? You can't see it on an MRI. You can't on an MRI find where's the line in the brain which makes a perimeter between the unconscious and the subconscious and the subconscious and the conscious. But it's there, but it's subtle. We can't see it, but we are bound by it every single day. And when those boundaries move or they're disrupted, we have to deal with the consequences because something is revealed or emerges or is let out that maybe we aren't ready for, or maybe we need to get ready for. So, okay, they can be changed, they can be reviewed, they're movable, boundaries are permeable. They can also be re-established. Just because a boundary's been broken by you or somebody else, don't be scared. Don't be scared. Don't just abandon the boundary because it can always be re-established. I just want to do, just so that we have a more of a visual, because, when we talk about abstract matters, because boundary in one sense is a concept, it helps to look at it visually in real life examples. So we have different types of boundary. I talked about there's physical boundaries, there's social boundaries, there's metaphysical boundaries, and there's spiritual boundaries. So we see they're increasingly more subtle. Okay, increasing. What does subtle mean? More and more imperceptible, right? So our own physical boundaries, walls, easy to perceive. You can see it. Okay, skin, easy to see, right? The skin barrier. So because it's perceptible, it's easier to visualize. Okay, easier for us to visualize and use as an analogy. We look at social boundaries. Again, although we see them in front of us, they are still less under our locus of control, because they become a little more complex because other people's free will is also involved. In fact, many. So they're a little more subtle in that way. We can't perceive all of it because society is huge. Everybody's got their opinion on relationships, whether it's in the community or the wider society and politics. And then we have metaphysical boundaries. I gave you the example of the boundaries between the unconscious, the subconscious, and the conscious mind. Even finer, even more subtle. Around us, subtle boundaries. You look at the boundary that gravity creates for all of us. Do you ever think about gravity? How many times a day do you think about it? You just don't. You act accordingly. You act in accordance with gravity and you accept it. There's an ease to it because you accept it. There are laws around us that are working all the time, the laws of nature on this planet, the rising of the sun, the setting of the sun. It's metaphysical, right? It looks physical, but it's actually metaphysical and it's completely out of our control, still more complex. And then we've got spiritual boundaries, and that's a different paradigm in itself and runs on different rules and parameters. So boundaries are everywhere. Boundaries are of different type, but they are all underpinned by these same fundamental things, that healthy boundaries protect, they create trust, safety, respect for ourselves, for other people, for divinity, both universal divinity, divinity the person, and divinity within ourselves. And they're everywhere. You can't ignore them. We are all acting according to boundaries. The more we get involved with recognizing boundaries, setting boundaries, and adjusting boundaries, also re-establishing boundaries where there might not be any, the healthier we'll find our lives become. So why do we struggle so much with boundaries? It's one of the biggest, most common challenges people have, is the struggle with boundaries. You see, our reason to respect and actually keep a boundary is whether it's for ourselves or for other people, goes beyond just being aware of it. It goes beyond just being aware of it. It's not just important to know that a boundary exists or needs to be set. It's important to know what's the consequence of keeping the boundary and what's the consequence of breaking the boundary. It's also really important to try and understand the value we place on the consequence of keeping or breaking the boundary. Because if we don't place any value on it, the boundary may as well not exist. Okay, so look at our sacred text. Look at the Bhagavad Gita, for example. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives Arjuna a number of ways to approach understanding who he is. Okay, he appeals to different levels of Arjuna's ego. He appeals to Arjuna's sense of identity or ego in relationship to what he thinks of himself, what he thinks his role in society is, what society views him as. Okay, then he also takes into consideration what could happen to Arjuna if he died on the battlefield, a hero or somebody who doesn't win the battle. And then he also gives him parameters around what could happen to him and what the consequences would be if he actually considered that he is more than simply flesh and blood, more than thoughts and feelings, more than actions and consequences, more than roles and relationships. But how would your life be different if you also remembered that you exist beyond all of these and you're actually a spirit soul? So he gives him all of these different parameters along with their consequences, but also helps Arjuna to understand the value of the different boundaries. I mean, he says a very simple thing. He says, as someone surrenders to me, they get the knowledge of how to come to me. He gives them a sliding scale. You increase how much you lean on me and lean into me. The more you lean on me and lean into me is directly proportionate to how much you understand me and how much I'll let you understand me. That's a very, very clear boundary, but it's flexible, right? It's a sliding scale. It's flexible. He's clear about what's on one side and what's on the other side, right? And he reestablishes it over and over again throughout the Gita, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, through his interactions with devotees. He does it through the modes of material nature, right? You look at the modes of material nature. What do we mean by modes of material nature? There are different forces around us. Some forces compel us to be happy in ignorance. Ignorance is bliss. Okay, let me just pretend nothing exists outside of me and I have no accountability, and let me sleep all day any old time and live without consequence. There's a kind of happiness that brings, but he also says that will just make you miserable. He establishes what kind of consequences there are if you break the boundaries or enter into the boundaries that surround this force of what's called passion, right? Happiness that's born of passion. Instant hit of joy, and then you get a tummy ache afterwards. Right? And then you have goodness, the forces of nature that compel us to do things that are difficult in the beginning, but pleasurable later on, like a really healthy diet. It may not always be so palatable in the beginning. You might be like, oh, this is kind of bland, needs to be chewed a little bit more, but gives you so much energy and gives you a clear mind. And then you develop a taste for it. And then there's those boundaries of spiritual forces, those that supersede and override material joy, joy beyond human psychology, joy that is not dependent on thought and feeling. So it's really important when we are establishing or reviewing boundaries that primarily for ourselves, before we set it or express it to anybody else, we understand what would be the consequences if this wall was broken down. What would I be letting in? And what would I be letting out? Right? Because when we say no to something, we also say yes to something else. And when we say yes to something, we always inevitably are saying no to something else. The more conscious we are with it, it makes both the yes more empowered and also the no stronger. So the consequences, and also helping ourselves understanding, why is this important? What is the value of this? What will benefit? Which aspects of me will benefit? As Bhakti yogis integrating both the humanity and divinity of ourselves, and simultaneously looking after both those aspects, we try to always look at every boundary we place in every part of our life to see, now, when I establish this boundary, can I benefit, protect, and nourish all aspects of myself, body, mind, soul, social? Because it is possible to live in a way that is enriching for our human life and nourishing and revealing for our spiritual life. Because spiritual life is really about waking up. It's really about healing a amnesia, a forgetfulness of the self, recovering from an amnesia. So in considering our boundaries, we want to establish boundaries that serve to nourish all aspects of ourselves. Actually, when we learn to say no, and when we learn to establish boundaries, and as we get better and better at establishing boundaries, our yes has more potency. Because when we establish a boundary based on what we want to say yes to, rather than what we want to avoid, yes, because boundaries can be fear-driven. Don't come near me. Right? So we've said that's now that fear-driven one is, I know what I'm saying no to, but I haven't really thought about what I want to say yes to. Okay, so that's a fear-driven boundary. But when we think about them, when we learn and practice putting boundaries in place, actually start with what you want to say yes to. Because when you start with what you want to say yes to, that yes has more potency, because we then start to create a wall with windows and doors, okay, which is can be moved, which can be reestablished, one which is built of bricks, which consider what we want to keep outside of that wall and what we want to let in. And so then the yes becomes easy. It becomes empowered. If we don't start with the yes and we start with the just, oh, I can tell you what I don't want, but I can't tell you what I do want, then it means we're constantly having to accept, reject, accept, reject, accept, reject. Because in the moment, we're having to decide what is this wall specifically for, other than the things that I'm scared of. Does that make sense? So if we want to create more trust, safety, and respect for ourselves, okay, because a lot of people who struggle with boundaries, it's because they're also struggling with trusting themselves, respecting themselves, and feeling safe in themselves. Safe in your own mind, safe in your own body, safe in your own life. Because where there's been struggles with boundaries, it's usually because those boundaries have been compromised at some point, often in our formative years, but it can also happen in adult life. You know, this is not pessimism, but we live in a difficult world. And the reason this world is so difficult is because we're homesick. Otherwise, the world is perfect. Perfection created by a perfect person. But because we're separated from that perfectly loving person, we're homesick. When you're homesick, even if you're in a palace, that palace doesn't bring you joy. Not all the time. You can be a little distracted by the gemstones and the pillars and the nice food on the table, but you miss the love and comfort of home. So as perfect and as wonderful as this world is, not very nice things happen when people feel homesick and they behave in ways that hurt themselves and other people. And when we get exposed to this, experience this, it's often what's leading to people either not keeping boundaries, not understanding boundaries, fearing boundaries, or not feeling safe in themselves. You know, there's many things influence our ability or inability to make and keep boundaries or manage boundaries, whether they're set by ourselves or other people. We've spoken a little bit about childhood experiences, lived experiences as adults. There's also our own innate physical strength, psychological strength, social strength, spiritual strength. But this strength has different things that contribute to it. You know, I just spoke a little about what we bring into this world, that which is innate, the innate health of it. What investment have we made in it previous to now in this lifetime? You know, how much do we nourish our physical strength, our social strength, our psychological strength and spiritual strength? Have we had periods of sickness? Have we had periods where more is demanded of us? Just don't have the strength to put in the boundary. How much have we nourished? How much have we nourished? Every part of ourself needs nourishment. Every part of ourself needs healing. Every part of ourself has to have some recovery time. So all of these influence our ability to establish or keep boundaries. I'm saying all of this because some of you may be sitting there lamenting or feeling disappointed at maybe actions or things you've experienced in the past, which have been a consequence of challenges with boundaries. I'm sharing all of this to help you to really understand that. Please forgive yourself. There's so many things that affect the way we do things. It's never too late to do it better, right? There's never too late to feel safe again. It's never too late to feel loved again. It's never too late to say goodbye to the past and celebrate even that which may be painful. So this is what we hope in this sangha, and we can support everyone to do. Because, you know, being able to establish and maintain boundaries, it's an essential, existential skill in our human identity. Because what it allows us to do, especially those who are actively seeking deeper divine connection, is that it creates a space and creates spaces in our human life for boundless spiritual love to come through. Boundless. Boundaries in our humanity allows boundaryless love to come into our life. From a world where the only thing and the primary thing really that determines your interactions with Krishna, with divinity, your activities, your service, and your relationship with him is really the flavor of love that you feel for him. So if we can become experts at human boundaries, then we'll really be leaving ourselves open for boundaryless love. There are, I've broken down boundaries a little bit in terms of different types and what can and can't be done by boundaries and with healthy boundaries. But I want to speak a little bit and share a little bit on, there's those boundaries that we establish for ourselves. We make those boundaries. We choose those boundaries. But we are constantly dancing with, okay? It's a dance. Dancing with other people's boundaries, but more than that, universal boundaries. And this is a really important factor for us to understand. Okay, because when we're looking at self-made boundaries or the human boundaries versus universal boundaries, and we relate our self-made boundaries or make them interdependent with universal boundaries, then we'll have the healthiest boundaries, because those boundaries will serve body, mind, and soul. Because universal boundaries are there to serve the soul, whereas human boundaries are relative. Okay, so relative boundaries can be conflicting, right? When you're trying to dance with another person, sometimes you might step on their toe, or, sometimes you might spin them too fast and they lose their balance, right? Because people have got different expectations, people have got different needs. So when we only dance and visit the realm of boundaries based on what I want in my human self, without any understanding of what universal boundaries and universal parameters look like, then we don't serve ourselves well, because we only serve ourselves in the temporary, right? We miss out a whole part of ourselves, which actually outlives all of that. But when you look at the absolute boundaries or the universal boundaries, because they are set by a perfectly loving person, because they are set by a perfectly loving person, they are harmonious and do the best for all people at all times. One of our sacred texts is, you look at a lot of the sacred texts in the Bhakti tradition, they're conversations, they're Q&As. Okay, and they're friendly Q&As, but extremely deep. And so Srimad Bhagavatam is one of these question and answer dialogues that takes place in the last 7 days of a glorious king called Parikshit Maharaj, a saintly king, a wonderful king, the kind of king that everybody would vote for. And he asks very perfect questions to somebody who can give perfect answers. He says, what is the best thing for all people at all times, especially one who's about to leave, one who's about to die? Because that's the most important question, because we're always dying. So this perfectly loving person, Krishna, he has given us ways to reconnect with him that are harmonious for all people, independent of gender, race, language, age, occupation, stage of life. And so when our human boundaries align with those boundaries, when they're interdependent on those boundaries, we will live a life which nourishes all parts of our self. And this is going to sound very corporate, but we will live an efficient life. We'll live an efficient life because we will get more by doing less, because we'll make wise choices. We'll make wise choices. Okay, so we are all actually really everybody here, because everybody who's on here is invested to some degree in their spiritual self. Everyone here is. That I'm very confident of. Otherwise, you would not be an urban Devi. This is what it means. The Devi is a goddess. Okay, whether you're in the city or in the countryside, you're goddesses. Goddesses are invested in their spiritual life. So we're all managing the absolute in a relative space. Okay, when you're managing the absolute in a relative space to varying degrees, we must understand both what the absolute parameters are and what the human parameters are. So I'm going to just share with you something that Krishna says, what Srila Prabhupada comments on in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Actually, this is in the sorry, not Srimad Bhagavatam, in the Bhagavad Gita. So because Arjun, you know, when his conversation, another Q&A with Krishna, Arjun asks Krishna about how to live in this world. How do I act in this world? How do I engage in this world in such a way that it's actually going to benefit all parts of me? Because he's also invested in, okay, well, hang on, I want to do this. I want to have mastery of my human self in the pursuit of my divine self and in the pursuit of loving and serving you. So Krishna says to him, you know, he says, this is a verse, verses 17 and 18 from the 4th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And he says, I'll just read the English. He says, the intricacies of action are very hard to understand. Therefore, one should know properly what action is, what forbidden action is, and what inaction is. Okay. He then goes on to say that one who sees inaction in action and action in inaction is intelligent among men, and he is in the transcendental position, although engaged in all sorts of activities. Srila Prabhupada tells us, a person acting in Krishna consciousness or God consciousness is naturally free from the bonds of karma or activity. His activities are all performed for Krishna. Therefore, he does not enjoy or suffer any of the effects of work. Consequently, he is intelligent in human society, even though he is engaged in all sorts of activities. Akarma means without reaction to work. The impersonalist seizes fruitive activities out of fear, so that the resultant action may not be a stumbling block on the path of self-realization. But the personalist knows rightly his position as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, he engages himself in the activities of Krishna consciousness. Because everything is done for Krishna, he enjoys only transcendental happiness in the discharge of this service. Those who are engaged in this process are known to be without desire for personal sense gratification. The sense of eternal servitorship to Krishna makes one immune to all sorts of reactionary elements of work. It is this last sentence, the sense of eternal servitorship to Krishna makes one immune to all sorts of reactionary elements of work. A sense of eternal servitorship, not waking up to your full identity, not knowing what your eternal spiritual form is. He's not saying you have to know what your outfit is, what your eternal, it's just a sense, just simply having a sense that what I'm doing is to please Krishna, okay, as his loving servant, because a servant is loving. This is not a transaction of dollars and pounds. It's an exchange of love. Just that frees us from past, present, and future binding reactions. Because the rope that frees, you understand how that knot was tied, and so you can unknot it. Why is this important for us to understand? Earlier, I was talking about how so many different things determine the health of our boundaries, right? Past, present, and future. So many different things determine our reaction to boundaries, our ability to readjust them, how we react to them, our past experience, so many different things. However, in the moment, even something like re-establishing boundaries, when it's done for the pleasure of, and in this mood of just having a sense, I'm here to serve, that mood, that won't bind you. It will free you. Because what does Krishna do? when we call out to him, when we offer something to him, he becomes invested in the consequences. And he will only give us consequences that nourish all parts of ourselves, body, mind, and soul. He even says this in the 11th canto to Uddhav. He says to Uddhav in the 11th canto, in the 29th chapter, in the 21st verse, in the last sentence, he says this: activities offered to me without personal motivation, even if they are externally useless, amount to the actual process of religion. Why am I sharing these particular verses? What is so important about these particular verses? See, we are drawn to words like this because we know it's the truth. We're pleasure-seeking beings by nature, so we always seek pleasure. We are loving beings who are eternally loved, so we seek love and connection always. We seek the truth always because we know the truth innately. Okay? However, a godless society, and we've been raised in a godless society, runs on a meritocracy. Most of us here have been brought up in countries and in communities which run on a meritocracy. And what happens with meritocracies is, again, it's relative. Okay, you have to do something to get something back. Okay, and what you get back is also relative. It's relative to what the other person might feel like giving back to you, because they're homesick too. And how their homesickness manifests, you don't know. And so when you live in a meritocracy, you've got varying degrees of entitlement versus an overdeveloped sense of taking responsibility for other people. So both the person who's entitled, who has greater expectations than what they invest, has skewed boundaries, and the person who has an overdeveloped sense of taking responsibility for other people also has skewed boundaries. These are all partly a result of a meritocracy, a homesick society. Okay, because we are all trying to, in a limited world, recreate limitless love, limitless connection, limitless wisdom, and a limitless life. So that's why so many spiritual people and essence seekers, when they join a community which is service orientated, love orientated, find themselves bringing these same things into the community. And service starts to be measured by the external action rather than the attitude behind the action. The amount of action rather than who the action is looking to serve. This is why Krishna reminds time and time again, I'm not really interested in the action itself. I'm interested in who you're doing it for. He didn't tell Arjun, well, actually, if you want to be the most evolved version of yourself, you got to do something different today. No, he says, I still want you to fight. But you don't fight just because it's in your human nature. Don't just fight because people might think you're a hero. Don't just fight because it's the right thing to do for society. Don't just fight because you might get heaven whether you win or lose. But if you fight because it's for me, because I'm asking you as your loving friend and protector, you'll get so much more. You'll get me forever, where you'll find limitless love, limitless connection, limitless life with full variety. But what does he say? Just fight. He doesn't even say win. Doesn't even say win. So time and time again, he comes back to attitude. So I think when many devotees find themselves in this situation of, I want to do so much, but it doesn't leave me space to actually do the things that nourish my spiritual life. It's usually as a result of challenges with boundaries, either from experiences before they join the community or experiences that we unfortunately in various pockets of our community, because we bring meritocracy in with us and capitalism and materialism, so many different things, we superimpose that and we project that onto Krishna's words, when really he is very interested in our attitude. And as we develop that attitude, what does he say? I carry what you lack and I enhance what you have. So we're going to move into a reflective exercise, because so many of our boundaries, or not having boundaries, is quite fear-driven. It's avoidance of suffering. We live in a world where our pleasure tends to be determined by avoiding suffering. Okay, so I think Damodar Priya, you're going to put them up in the chat. Everybody's going to break out into groups. So these are the breakout questions. I will read them out. So it's time for us to churn and reflect. Let's put theory to practice. So you do this once in this group, and then you'll find it easier to do it over and over again, and it will start to become second nature. Here are your breakout questions. The first question is, I want you all to choose an area of your life where you're being particularly challenged. Okay. First of all, identify what you're actually struggling to say no to in that particular. Because if you're finding something challenging, most people are struggling to say no to something. If it easily comes to you what you're struggling to say yes to, there's usually a no to it as well. And when you can't say no, what are you saying yes to? I really want you to look at where you're finding things challenging. Where can't you say no? When can't you say no? And what are you saying yes to instead? Okay, what comes your way when you're not able to put a boundary in place? What do you end up doing? And then secondly, really think about it, because it's going to be emotive. Okay, it's going to bring things to the surface. Maybe things that aren't even alive right now. What fears are preventing you from establishing or keeping a particular boundary? Often when we identify what the fear is, that is driving the difficulty in putting in standards for ourselves. It may be just for yourself. You cross your own boundary all the time. Not anybody else. You do it for yourself. You don't keep your own boundary. When we identify the fear, we identify where we've overinvested in something, believing that thing is what's going to give us happiness or avoidance of that thing. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Damodar Priya and to instruct you on this next bit. Hare Krishna.
For reading the reflections questions, but also unpacking them a little bit for us. So that'll help us in going into breakout rooms. So I'm just going to pause. So Hare Krishna, and welcome to our Q&A and reflection section. And this is your opportunity to raise a virtual hand and either ask a question of our speaker or to reflect on what came up for you during our breakout rooms. So please go ahead and raise a virtual hand. And if folks are feeling shy, I do have a question that was sent to me by someone before they left, but nope, we have Deepa. Haribol, Deepa, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hare Krishna. Yes, when we were talking just now, it really came to me that as my self-love increases, me setting boundaries has become a lot easier without the shame and the guilt and all that. So it's very much about self-worth, isn't it?
Is that a question, Deepa?
Well, it's a share and a question. If you could say anything more about it, that would be good.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. When our boundaries do start from within. What do we allow and don't allow for ourselves? Right? And when we don't have value for the different parts of ourselves, because all parts of us are divine because they come from the divine, but we understand them just in terms of what's most evolved, what's least evolved, what's going to last the longest, what's going to last the least amount of time, more to understand proportions of where we place value. And the trouble is, because living in this world is so challenging, and not just challenging because of our experiences, but we're not educated on our multifaceted nature. We're not educated on the different aspects of ourselves. We're not educated to be conscious. And because we're not educated, we don't value. You can't value something you know nothing about. If you don't know much about yourself, it's hard to value yourself, regardless of whether people treat you well or badly. So when we know more about ourselves, and this is what the beauty is of understanding ourselves from the perspective of sacred texts, because within the sacred texts lie the teachings on even the human self. Krishna doesn't just tell Arjun about the soul. He tells him all about his human self too, and how the human self moves through this world. We can value. There isn't anything in the sacred text that tells you something about the human self that makes you think it's worthless. It actually makes you wonder, wow, the human self's really amazing. Look what amazing things the human self can do. And so when we understand the self and the many aspects, and we're educated, then we have placed proper value. When we place proper value, then yeah, we have self-respect, we have trust, we establish good boundaries. So you're absolutely right. It's so much of our ability to establish boundaries is to do with our own self-respect and our own self-worth. But which selves do we hold value for?
But also, isn't it conditioning? Conditioning plays a big part here, doesn't it?
But education is part of conditioning. Awareness is part of conditioning. What is conditioning? Conditioning is based on exposure, right? People have come up this word conditioning. Most people who've studied any type of psychology, they'll be familiar with Pavlov's dogs. Okay. And it's Pavlov's dogs illustrates this idea of conditioning, that people get used to believing that their experience is true forever. Okay, you look at the mice in the dogs in Pavlov's dogs, right? And conditioning means we respond then accordingly. So in that experiment, Pavlov, he notices that dogs salivate when they see food, right? So he starts to ring a bell whenever they see food and they salivate. Then he takes the food away, and they still salivate when he rings the bell, even though there's no food there. Okay, so this is what conditioning is. It's conditioning just means, what am I used to? But we can change what we're used to through education. So spiritual education is so important. And I don't mean education so much in the academic sense. I mean education just in just knowing, just awareness. Like, who am I? Why am I here? Who's everybody else? What am I interacting with when I'm talking to people? Am I really seeing them for who they are? So isn't it just conditioning? What we expose ourselves to is also a big part of how we express our choice. Do we end up exposing ourselves to things willy-nilly, or are we invested in discerning what we expose ourselves to? Do we want to become spiritually reconditioned? Or do we want to continue with human and material conditioning where we can remain homesick? So this self-worth is important, but which self? And if we can heal all selves, that's amazing.
Thank you, Deepa, for your share, and Citi-Śakti for unpacking that. We do have a lot of people with their hands.
Yeah, Lisa actually had a hand
Lisa
up
had
first.
her,
I have to vouch
she had
for
a
her.
virtual.
Yes.
Yeah. So Lisa, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question or share your reflection.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I have a question for Citi-Śakti. How big of a role do you feel communicating when we in our mind create boundaries? How big of a role do you think communicating them to others plays in the success of those boundaries, keeping those boundaries?
Very good question. Communicating our boundaries is most important the closer someone is to us, but it's the place where we do it least. Because in our closest relationships, we think love means the other person should psychically know everything we need. And so a lot of our conflict is around, well, you didn't meet my expectations. Or if you knew me well, if you loved me, you'd know that. But we're always changing. We can't keep up with the way we're always changing. We can't keep up with the way the body changes, our likes and dislikes change, our personality changes. Some things surprise us. So if we can't keep up with that, we can't meet our constant changes, how do we expect the people closest to us to do that? So with the people closest to us in the work environment, service environment, home environment, boundaries are, it's important to express them, even your own ones, like, oh, you know, I'm going to spend more time investing in my physical health. That's really important for somebody who's in your intimate space to know. The further someone away is from you, the more likely it is that they're going to read your boundaries with unspoken cues anyway. Because we can see things from a distance sometimes better than we can up close. Sometimes when you get up close to something, it just becomes blurred. But then when you're far away, like, oh, I see that clearly, you know? So it's even more important. But of course, yeah, expressing, but not, you don't have to get into too much detail. Sometimes some things call for, you only need to express the boundary for a particular circumstance. Or if a person doesn't seem to understand that there's some boundaries that you're going to think, this is a no-brainer. I don't even have to explain this. You know, why do I need to explain this? It's the line is there. Why would anybody cross it? But people have their own things going on. At the tube station, right? Subway station, there's a yellow line. It's a significant distance away from the edge of the platform for people's safety. It is bright yellow. Okay, everybody can see it. And yet, every single time, I mean, for the last 50 years, every single time I've been to the train station, without fail, the station master goes, please can I remind passengers to remain behind the yellow line for their own safety. And every single time, there'll be lots of people who you see them take a very big step back. And there's other people who go, I think I'll go closer over it. And other people who completely just ignore what you said. So yes, we should express, but it also shouldn't be a whole thing. My whole life and dialogue is about just letting people know my boundaries. Some things, you know, they'll just naturally fit, but the people closest to us, definitely.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Citi-Shakti. So we have Dina Palika Devi Dasi. Please unmute yourself and share.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna,
Thank you
Dina
so
Palika.
much.
Hare
Haribo,
Krishna.
thanks so much for this class. Very important topic. I'm going to try to fuse a couple questions together. So I've noticed that having lived in different ladies' ashrams and, you know, a mix of younger devotees and older devotees, that sometimes there's this like dissonance in terms of perhaps older devotees who have, you know, done pioneering or maybe really had to like, I mean, drop probably a lot of boundaries just to do whatever it took. And then versus younger devotees coming in who often need a lot of like, I mean, either medical support, getting their health back together, getting their mental health together. And that sometimes there can be, either due to our own stuff as younger devotees, there can be shame that comes in, or perhaps even shaming from older devotees who are expecting the younger devotees to also just drop their boundaries and, you know, do whatever, like be in that same mood of like, oh yeah, that's just what Krishna consciousness is like you do whatever you're asked at any time, at any point. And so I'm just wondering like how to, it seems like perhaps sometimes there's different, you know, sets of expectations and needs there. And so how to be respectful and not make offenses at the same time communicate. Yeah, just if you have any insights on that, if that question made sense.
The question did make a lot of sense. You use this term, there's a generation of devotees who had to drop boundaries. Many of the elder and senior generation of devotees didn't have access to an integrated and mature approach to balancing human life and spiritual life after Srila Prabhupada left. You know, and Rukmini Devi knows better than me. Srila Prabhupada's approach was very integrated. His approach was balanced. His approach did allow for humanity and divinity to both progress together. But when the father leaves, and the father is of the caliber of Srila Prabhupada. And he leaves his young children with a great responsibility to continue his work. The had to is multi-layered. They had to drop boundaries, multi-layered. It's driven by a desire to please their spiritual master, as well as many other things. And so in ashrams, you get different levels of consciousness. If you remember, if you read actually Srila Prabhupada's Lilamrita, you hear his disciples speak of his memories. If you joined the bhakti process in the 60s or 70s, you dedicate your whole life. This is it. Now you can join at any stage. Join the community. There's a generosity, there's a compassion to that. You can join at any stage. We have much greater diversity in terms of the types of people who are welcome. Much greater diversity also, though, in terms of where people are at in terms of placing importance on different aspects of themselves. And you know what? It's not just in ashrams. There's a generational gap in everywhere. You know, I get people in offices saying, you know, I'm either baby boomer or I'm, what's the one, Gen X, and we're robust, and, you know, we know how to stick it out in a job. You know, we don't get so distracted, and, you know, look at Gen Z, they're snowflakes, they don't stick to a job, and this, you know, there's this, do you see what I mean? There can be that. It's not just, what I'm trying to say is, it's not just in ashrams that there can be a generational gap or a misunderstanding of where people are coming from. So your question was around, how do we avoid offenses? Offenses doesn't mean they don't understand me and I don't understand them, or we disagree. People are going to disagree all the time. Are we doing it nicely? Are we doing it respectfully? Okay, offenses happen when, whether we see differences or similarities, we do it in a way to make the other person feel less. But you can describe something in a very neutral way, okay? And you can also describe the very same thing in a very critical way. The words can even be exactly the same. It's the tone. So where there are generational gaps, different views of any type in ashrams, outside of ashrams, rather than, if we can't disagree or be different nicely, maybe we try and find what we do unite on. And the fact that all of you are in an ashram means the one thing you definitely unite on is you're dedicating your life to serving your spiritual self, serving Krishna, serving Guru as the priority. That's a big thing to unite on. And where we can unite on our similarities, then the differences we can actually keep very nicely, because we need those differences. If we all had exactly the same attitude that was there, and mission-orientated focus expressed in exactly the same way as it was done in the 60s and 70s and 80s, it may not suit today, right? So I find actually what you've expressed maybe could just be a cry out for love on both sides. And I guess I'm inviting you to see if there's any opportunities for all the generations in the ladies' ashrams to come together over what you can unite on.
Thank you so much. And that is a big question to unpack, and we are starting to get to the end of our time together. So I encourage those who still have questions to check out the chat. We have shared both Citi-Shakti's website and her Instagram, where you'll be able to connect with her further. And there's also a spiritual warrior community that's a WhatsApp group that you'll be able to join and be able to further connect through there. So we did have Nurhan keeping their hand raised for a long time. So we're going to take her question for the last one. Please go ahead.
Sure.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hi. Thank you for today's session. Actually, just I would like to. It's great session today. You woke me up so much today. Thank you. And also the other day, Maharaj, I think said, or Keshava Swami. I just would like to finish with that, which affected my boundaries so much, influenced me. It says we are relaxed on a bus when we don't know the driver. We are relaxed on a plane. We don't know the pilot. We are relaxed in a ship when we don't know the captain. But so why don't we relax when Krishna is in control? It's absolutely beautiful, and those I write it down, and I'm gonna hang it on the wall. And especially what you said today, assume as you may, is brilliant. Thank you so much. That's all I want to say.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. If you don't mind, if I could just close with a few words off the back of that.
Yes, please go ahead.
He ends with, why don't we trust Krishna? Where we don't have trust, it means we have a fear. So what is it that we fear that Krishna can't give us, that we think something else here or someone else here can give us? When we answer that question, it actually becomes very easy to let go. Very easy to let go of the things we cling to. Thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure. And I look forward to reconnecting with some of you. I wish you all much love and happiness. Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Citi-Shakti, for your time. And thank you, everyone who took the time to open themselves up in so many ways with your vulnerable hearts and sharing with all of us. So now we have our dear Rukmini, who makes all of this possible in bringing us together, and who will finish our time together. Please go ahead.
Actually, Krishna is the one who makes all of this possible. But thank you so much. I thought this was just such a brilliant and compassionate presentation that we can all benefit. I know I can benefit so much. I loved in particular when you said about how, I was thinking of Prabhupada when you said, Krishna's asking Arjuna to fight. He's not asking him to win. And I thought so much of Srila Prabhupada when he came to, I'm in New York right now, when he came to New York and he said, you can make me a success or failure. So what trust is that? So I personally was so enriched by this session. I'm so grateful to you for your friendship always and for this beautiful, brilliant session. Thank you so much. So next time, what's the date for next time, Damodar Priya? August 16th. We have Rajalila, another god sister of Citi-Shakti, who'll be speaking about faith and grief, a compassionate look at loss and grief. And she would like to discuss a topic that touches all of us. And she says that we might think because I'm a devotee, I shouldn't feel this sad. If my faith was stronger, I wouldn't be crying. So she says, today we want to completely dismantle that misconception. We will explore the losses and learn important lessons from a few women in the Srimad Bhagavatam and how they grieve their losses. We will also hear how modern-day women in bhakti process their tragic losses. So that's beautiful. And I hope you'll all join, mark your calendars for August 16th for another brilliant disciple of the great Bhakti Tirtha Swami. We can hear from her. Thank you so much, Citi-Shakti, and thanks to all of you for being here and making this so rich and such a beautiful, multi-generational sangha of beautiful, brilliant, heart-open women. Thank you. And thank you, Damodar Priya. Hare Krishna.